what could not be tolerated in Washington was a communist island 90 miles off Florida. This was just a non-starter.
As long as it existed, the US's control over the whole of Latin America was in question. So long as Castro was there, that challenge would persist.
Cuban Army pilots opened the first phase of organized revolt with bombing raids on 3 military bases. 2 of the B-26 light bombers then seek asylum in Florida. On the heels of the air raids, landings were effected by rebels at several places on the Cuban coast, and the rebellion against the red-tinged dictator was on, with the refugee pilots claiming a full-scale army.
People who are young today have got to understand what the Cold War meant. I mean, it was a terrifying 30 or 40 years in the life of the world.
Nixon told Haldeman to threaten the director, Richard Helms, that if the FBI went ahead, his agency's worst humiliation, the 1961 fiasco at the Bay of Pigs, would be dragged up again.
He said, when you get in the people, say, look, this is the president now saying to me, look, the problem is that this will open the whole Bay of Pigs thing.
Trained in Florida, but Ambassador Stevenson makes a quick denial.
These charges are totally false, and I deny them categorically. The United States has committed no aggression against Cuba, and no offensive has been launched from Florida or from any other part of the United States.
My purpose, my primary purpose, as is clearly indicated by the tape, and I don't dispute it at all, I wanted to stop the investigation.
We got word that Haldeman and Ehrlichman wanted to meet with Helms and Walters at 1 o'clock at the White House.
And we went in to see Mr. Ehrlichman, who talked in a general way about the embarrassment of this and so forth and so on, and people had shown excessive zeal, and Haldeman came in.
The president has asked us to tell you that he wants, I think I said Dick Walters, to contact Pat Gray at the FBI and explain to them that exploring these Cubans and their ties and all that sort of thing, and the money source, may lead into all sorts of other things that we shouldn't be getting into, and that they should not go any further in that exploration.
At that point, Haldeman carried out the president's ploy. He warned Helms that Watergate could reopen the Bay of Pigs scandal.
Helms, a typically cold as a cucumber, icy, super spy type guy, came totally unglued.
Frankly, to this day, when I think back on that meeting, it's a long time ago, but it didn't seem to me that any of these things made any sense much.
The government there denies that Cubans are among the soldiers being instructed, but observers have said otherwise. Professional soldiers are among the teachers, and once trained, the men mysteriously disappear. Guatemala has held no brief with the Castro regime and has aided the rebels. In Cuba itself, the people have been exhorted by Castro to push back the invader, and 300,000 militiamen have been mobilized. The invasion was successful in its early hours, with Castro, of course, blaming the U.S. Is it the first chink in his armor?
Castro had not been in power more than 9 or 10 months before the CIA started writing memos and knocking on the door of the State Department saying, we have to develop a plan to overthrow this guy. He's uncontrollable, and the masses seem to respond to him in a way that we have never seen before.
The CIA, of course, came up with a plan. They came up with a bad plan, and the military harumphed at it because they knew how bad it was, and intelligence analysts weren't shown the plan because operational people weren't confident with the plan. But this is what the president wanted. So you had a very naive, overrated American president, I might add, in John F. Kennedy, going ahead with the Bay of Pigs, which was just destined to fail.
So just why was this operation destined to fail?
For all kinds of political reasons, American troops could not be seen to be invading Cuba. The political risks were far too high, including possible war with the USSR. So the CIA used Cuban mercenaries. Mercenaries are rotten soldiers. Mercenaries very, very rarely win. You know, they fight for money, they're fat, they're lazy, they're ill-disciplined, they don't know how to use a rifle.
These shots were filmed by enemies of Cuba. A handful of bandits has landed on Cuban soil.
The CIA put together a fighting force of 1,500 anti-communist Cuban exiles who lived in the United States. These weren't army men, but the CIA quickly trained and armed them and sent them off to fight against the professional Cuban army in the Bay of Pigs.
I think if you're looking at, you know, small paramilitary groups of less than 2,000, you know, taking on 35,000 sort of seasoned troops, well, it's a no-brainer. But the fact is they're going to be killed. The CIA were sponsoring a Cuban fighting force as opposed to Americans. So if it's successful, America can wave the flag and saying what a wonderful thing they've done. If it was unsuccessful, what you don't have is body bags coming back and being buried on everybody's TV screens in America in Arlington Cemetery.
The invasion was a total disaster. A, because they didn't know how to fight properly. B, because they kept landing in the wrong places. And C, because the people didn't rise up to help them.
They didn't understand Cuba at all. They didn't understand the nationalism of the revolution. And consequently, they had an operation which became known as a perfect failure. And in the end, it consolidated the Cuban Revolution rather than completing its goal, which is to wipe Fidel Castro off the face of the map.
Cuba will never retreat. Cuba will hold out. Our country or death.
It really was a total catastrophe and left Kennedy with egg all over his face.